Good morning. Today is May 28th, 2015, and we're here with Samuel Price. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this interview today. My name is Frances Lara.
And I'm Ann Smith from College for the History Department, Sam Proctor Oral History Program.
So, Sam, if we could start with you telling us when and where were you born?
I was born in Jacksonville, Florida. I think at the St. Luke's Hospital, which was over in Springfield. I think it was the first year it was opened. I always believe in doing something first. But
Okay, and what did your parents do for a living? Can you tell us a little bit about them?
my father was born in Augusta, Poland. The dates vary, but the best date I have is 1900. He died at the age of 46. He moved to Baltimore, Maryland when he migrated from Poland to Hamburg to Baltimore, Maryland. And he had a room on, I think it was Lexington Street. It was my grandmother's house, and that's where he met my mother. My mother's Ray Price, born in Baltimore, Maryland. I'm sorry, I can't give you the date. That senior moment.
Okay, and when did your father move to Jacksonville?
It would be in the early 20s. He moved to Jacksonville. He had a brother that lived in St. Augustine at the time. I think he was a county commissioner in St. Augustine. And if you follow the history of the Jews migrating in the United States, they came into either Baltimore or New York. This is as I understand it, as I've received information. And they followed the railroad down to south. And what would happen, a family member might drop off at Richmond, another family would go to the next stop, and this led her into my going into the Navy too. Something very similar.
Okay, and then what did your father do for a living? What did he work in?
He started out as a plumber in Baltimore, Maryland, plumber's helper. And if you know plumber's tools, they're very heavy. And when he went from job to job, he told me he had to go on a streetcar, take all his tools with him, and take a streetcar to wherever the job was. From there, he opened up a rag shop, a junk business in Jacksonville, and he went into used gasoline equipment, drums, pumps, and I remember the old gasoline pump, which all it had was 5 gallons. And then he emptied that, you had to pump up 5 gallons more, and then it went into the car. I think gas at the time, if I remember, was 19 cents a gallon.
It's incredible. 19 cents. Okay, did you have any siblings?
Yes, I had 2 sisters and 1 brother.
Okay. And can you tell us a little bit about your childhood, what it was like growing up in Jacksonville then?
Well, my oldest memory, I don't know if it should go on this interview or not. I was under the house with a neighborhood young lady playing doctor. My mother caught us and raised.
Oh, okay. So your family was Jewish. Did your parents really try to instill that in your upbringing?
You know, I think my parents led by example and showing. I don't think my mother ever told me when to come in or what to do. She was a good disciplinarian. And if I did something wrong, I could see her now chasing me with a broom handle. But I don't think she ever caught me. My dad worked hard back then. He'd leave at daybreak and come back after dinner. But he was very good to us. And he died early at 46. And I'll go into that later also.
What was it like your schooling while you were in school? Did you like school? Did you have a favorite subject?
Oddly enough, I was good in mathematics. I didn't like English. I loved history and geography. They don't teach geography today, and they're missing so much. People don't know 10 miles outside of their city. I think that instilled in me the desire to visit places. My favorite subject was an English teacher I had in the 9th grade. First grade teacher, I can still remember. She was talking about the Crusades, and she brought out some crackers, and she said, "These are the crackers the Crusaders ate." I believe in her to this day. Those are the original crackers. And then I had a Spanish teacher, Mrs. Thompson, and Robert E. Lee. The 10th and 11th grade, I don't know, I think she gave me the ability to dream and to think. I wasn't the best Spanish teacher, but Spanish has assisted me in my traveling and my love of going places. I found that you don't have to know much of a language to get around, but if you know a little bit, it goes a long way. Also, Eunice. The only class I ever had to repeat was in the 12th grade, was an English teacher, a small English teacher. And I don't know what it was. I couldn't satisfy her. I repeated the course, but I do respect her ability.
So when you were younger, what job did you want to do when you grew up? Did you want it to be a job that had a lot of travel?
No, I wanted to build something. Always, I was the first one in the neighborhood to have Tinker Toys, and blocks, and a log cabin. And I've always had a desire to build something. When I went to college in 1946, University of Florida, I started to be signed up to be a dentist. It sounded good. And then I went so far as to go to a class where I had to dissect a frog. I walked in, I walked out. It was the best decision I ever made in my life.
Do you remember what year you graduated high school?
1944.
Okay.
1944, the entire class went into the service. I don't remember anyone, unless they could get into the service, that didn't respond to the call. It was just an automatic. I mean, almost like apple pie and motherhood. You went off.
So, since we're getting into your service, these are the questions that Anne is going to ask. Do you want us to take a break now? Or do you
No, keep going.
Okay.
Keep going.
Okay. I'll take a turn at it.
Yes.
So in 1944, you were in school or finishing up high school, and so what did you know of what was going on in the world?
I love that question. But at that time you had radios. That was the only means of communication, and the newspaper. And I do remember in 1939, when Hitler invaded Poland, the news we got was a newsboy going down the middle of Post Street yelling, "Extra, extra, Germany invades Poland." That was our introduction, was a newspaper, and we didn't know anything until the following day when we read the newspaper again. We had a commentator H.V. Kaltenborn. You know the name.
Yes, I do.
And when he spoke, you thought God was talking. I mean, he had a deep baritone voice, very deep voice. And when he spoke, you knew what he says was the gospel. And no one I know missed that. I believe it was the 6 o'clock WJ. We had 2 radio stations in Jacksonville. We had WJAX and WNBR. WJAX was, if I remember, 90 on the dial, and the WNBR was 1460 or something like that on the dial. We turned to that, and I think we heard the news, and then we heard Amos and Andy.
Yes.
Another side story.
That's right.
When my brother and I, we were just a little over a year apart. When we walked home, the first one that said funnies, window, and radio had his choice of the funnies, the window. Two of us slept in a garage. In a garage in a bed, and big window there, big screen. When it got hot, you wanted to sleep by the window. And radio had your choice of radio stations. Mm-hmm. Well, we both had the same choice, Amos and Andy. It was great.
Yeah.
And then The Shadow was earlier.
Well, when news of the war or how it was going, when that came across the radio, was that conversation in your home or at dinner time?
I really don't think so, but I think I digested every inch of it.
Did you?
Yeah, I'd grab a map and try and follow the cities where they were and what they were doing.
Uh-huh. And so when you graduated and most of your classmates also went into the service, did they go into various branches?
I joined up with a classmate, Billy Queen.
Uh-huh.
Billy Queen, I really got acquainted with World War II. We were in class, it must have been in the 10th grade. They came and took Billy out of class. His brother was a flying cadet and he was killed. That was my first experience with death in World War II.
Pretty close.
And Billy and I joined and went off together to boot camp in Camp Perry, Virginia.
How was that for you?
It was June, July, and August, and that's a clay ground,
Yeah.
and it was hot.
Yeah.
We lived in Quonset huts. Going to digress for a second. I met a fellow in boot camp, Elmer Parkin from Jacksonville. I'd never met him before.
Uh-huh.
And we went through boot camp, became very close friends. We broke up, and we split when we left boot camp. And I go aboard ship, there's Elmer Parkin. He was a radioman striker, and I was a radioman striker, and he was a radar striker. He was in radar.
What does striker mean?
Well, you don't have the you seaman second, seaman first. You're learning the trade.
I see.
Mm-hmm.
And we broke up. When we came back, I came home on emergency leave, and I didn't see Elmer for several months, never called him. I went to the University of Florida. There's Elmer in the same class. We went to building construction together for 4 years. So it's odd how paths cross. To this day, I hate to say goodbye. I'd rather say I'll see you later.
That's right.
And I don't know why. I just think paths cross so many times.
That's right.
Whether you want them to or not. I look forward to paths crossing.
Yeah.
Elmer now lives in Crescent City. In Crescent City.
Well, was the physical training hard for you, or did you find it?
I didn't like it. I grew up having my own bathroom.
Yeah.
And when if I wanted to take a shower, it was a group shower. It was a group. The toilets were groups, no cover or anything.
That takes some.
It was a complete change. But I just went with the flow. There's no sense fighting it.
Yeah. And so when did you finish your basic training?
I think it was in about August of 44. I don't
Okay.
think it was September.
Okay.
Or August or September. And then we went training to go aboard ship.
Uh-huh. And where was that?
Norfolk, Virginia.
Norfolk.
And I don't remember much about that except I had a appendix attack, and they operated on me in Norfolk.
Yes.
And side note on that, one incident, back then, if you had your appendix taken out, they taped you, must be the whole stomach, and if I remember, it was either 10 days or 2 weeks, you stayed in bed with that tape, and when they took that tape off, you knew it. It wasn't like the tapes today. I do remember one instance, the first time I could use a bedpan, the first time, they bring me a bedpan, and they put cloth screens around four ways around the bed, and 3 nurses stood at the foot of my bed gabbing, talking. Well, I tell you what, I missed the whole bedpan.
I think it was their fault.
It was their fault.
It was. Well, now, what was your job when you started into the training at Norfolk?
They were making a fire control.
Okay.
I didn't know what IQ was or what levels, it just never occurred to me. And I had a pretty good score there.
Uh-huh.
So they made a fire control man out of me.
I see.
And when we left on our shakedown cruise, it was a brand new destroyer. It went into commission on Thanksgiving Day, 1944.
Uh-huh.
And everybody was new to the ship.
Yes.
And how they made a crew out of it, I don't know, but it worked.
It worked.
I mean, most of them were 18, 19 years old.
Sure.
Some of them had never been off the farm.
That's right.
And there they were at sea with a responsible job. They were responsible for the running and the safety of the ship. And the first trip out, we went into the North Atlantic. It must have been a little later than that, approaching December. And the weather was so rough. I mean, they sent me out to clear the controls on these 20 millimeters. And when I went back to the fire control center, everyone else was drinking. All of a sudden, drinking coffee. I had to clear that. They were drinking coffee. And after about 4 or 5 days, I said, this isn't for me. I want to stay down here and drink coffee. Well, they chased me off to the gunner's gang. And we were already headed down the east coast of the United States. It was warmer. And I walked back to report for duty. And I see the gunner's mate cleaning out the barrels of a 5-inch gun. And all I could see them sticking their hands in black grease and putting it down the barrel. I didn't like that. I mean, I should have just shut my mouth. So I hid. And how long can you hide on a destroyer? Well, the chief gunner's mate sent me down to the galley to serve breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
Uh-huh.
Well, when I got to the galley, I only told them half a story. And I was just sitting worrying for one meal, helping on one meal. But I had to hide the rest of the time. And it's difficult to hide on a destroyer. Well, when they caught up with me, I ran up to the communications center. I said, I want to be a radioman. Uh-huh. Well, they put me in the radio gang just ahead of time. And I learned to type by looking over someone's shoulder, the way their hands were. Really? Yeah, that's right. I had to.
It was down to the wire, wasn't it?
Down to the wire. And that's where I ended up the rest of the war as a radioman.
Well, now what was the name of this destroyer?
Gainard, USS Gainard,
All right.
Gainard.
Okay, all right. And so you were on that ship for the duration?
Duration.
Good for you. Good.
Now, another story. When they put our group from boot camp on the destroyer, they pretty well split us up into two groups. The other half went on the Drexler. It was a DD 741. And we fought on the picket line off Okinawa together, and we were even credited with shooting one plane down. I mean, that was, they got half credit, we got half credit.
Uh-huh.
And shortly after that, the Drexler was sunk. So it went down in less than a minute. They lost 157 out of 300 crew. And on the picture on the wall, you'll find lots of the Drexler. And
were you part of the rescue team?
no, we weren't near it when it went
there.
down.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you came back from the North Atlantic,
We went through the Panama Canal
Okay.
to San Diego,
all right,
where we outfitted.
uh-huh,
And going across, we did most of our firing and practice and learning how to use all the armament.
sure,
And at that time, they made me a sight setter on a twin 5-inch gun.
Oh, really?
That was my battle station.
yes,
Everyone had a workstation, everyone had a battle station.
uh-huh,
And on a twin 5-inch mount, you could reach out with each elbow and touch both of the guns.
uh-huh,
There was, again, very little for me to do. If an emergency, the electronics went out, I had to start cranking in a hurry.
yeah, yeah,
We went from San Diego to Anawit to Pearl Harbor.
uh-huh,
At Pearl Harbor, I don't even think I got off, so I didn't see any of the battle damage.
Have you heard about it? Do you remember hearing about it?
I heard about it, and I can tell you exactly where I was when it came over the radio. We were going to visit friends. It was a Sunday, and we were just passing San Marco, and the radio announcer came over the car radio that the Japanese had attacked Pearl Harbor.
What did you think?
What I think, everybody was in shock. I mean, I guess that best describes it. No hysteria or anything, but just couldn't believe it. Is it?
Yeah.
Like giving you bad news you knew couldn't be bad news.
Yeah, yeah,
And in Jacksonville, right away, you saw the Army come out. All of the underpasses had guards, and
oh, really?
on Myrtle Avenue, I remember on both ends they had
Sure,
guards at the Myrtle Avenue underpass.
sure.
Uh,
This would have been crucial.
at that time, I became what they call it, looking for airplanes out in,
A spotter for...
and there was a golf course off Gulf Air Boulevard, and they had a tower, like a ranger tower.
Uh-huh.
And I volunteered, usually on weekends, I'd spend the evening there. And had to go one by, you describe the number of engines and the direction.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
I don't know what they did with the information after that, but I gave the information.
Yeah, yeah,
Didn't have as many flights as they have now.
yeah.
In Jacksonville, they had, at the beach one weekend, there was a ship sunk right off of Jacksonville, a oil tanker.
Really?
It's within a very short distance ashore.
Did you have reports of submarine sightings?
I do remember one Sunday, and I still don't know what it was. I was looking out past the pier, and there was like a cutting towers in the distance all the way out. It all of a sudden disappeared. We saw some planes come, and whether they dropped depth charges, I don't know. But that's the only remembrance of anything like that. Now, they did make everybody block out half their headlights, and there was some semblance of closed down of lights, but it wasn't really effective. There were too many ships sunk off the East Coast.
Yeah, yeah. Well, then let's go back to the Pacific. So you were on your way
to Pearl Harbor.
Pearl Harbor.
And then we went from there to Anahuac, which had been recently captured. And we refueled, and from there we went to, we joined the battle group going to Okinawa.
I see.
And Okinawa, it was on Easter Sunday, the 1st of April.
Yeah.
We made our landings. There were several landings. We were part of a false landing in order to entice the Japanese out of shelters. And then we went to Camarata, and shortly after that, well, we went to Saipan, and this is right after the battle. In the hall, I'll show you a piece of Saipan. And
so, was there any action, or you were just following, having...
We reprovisioned, and then we headed to Okinawa, and we were there on the first day. But we saw nothing the first day. Then we went to Camarata, which was a fleet anchorage. And I watched a kamikaze plane come into the harbor. Not a shot fired at it. It flew in and hit a command ship. And I just watched it. So, Camarata was a place they were going to launch all these suicide boats.
I see.
And they were all up in the caves. And I remember one night, I was very, very devout, a devout coward. So, and I didn't want to sleep below deck. So that night I slept on a torpedo deck. I woke up in the morning. I didn't realize they blew the tubes, the boiler tubes at night, and I looked like a black man. covered with all smoke.
Oh my goodness.
Next night I was going to beat them, and I slept under the torpedo tubes. And I guess there was a Japanese sniper picking on one of these landing ship supports, landing ship, LSS, I guess they were called. And this one was loaded to bear. And all of a sudden, this landing ship just unloaded with everything it had. I was under the torpedo tube with about 18 inches of space. I jumped up, and it knocked me out.
Oh my gosh.
So when I woke up, it was all over.
That's better than hiding.
But you really didn't know what they were up to. And on Okinawa, we performed picket duty. They took the destroyers and put them 50 miles out off of Okinawa to catch the Japanese raids from Formosa, from the islands that were set to hit the ships. And one time we had 50 planes, Japanese planes, Japs, and approach our ship. And we came through it fairly well. We were credited with shooting down 5 Japanese planes, and we took, turn it off, and we took 1 kamikaze. And that kamikaze came in out of the sun, and no one saw it until the last minute. Charlie Sr., a close friend of mine, he was a storekeeper, but he was on watch at the bridge, and he saw it, and yelled to the first lieutenant, what was his name? Oh, I'll tell you later. But it was, and we turned, and he started firing. We had bullets on our deck and some rigging he was taking away, and it crashed 10 feet, they say 10 feet, on our starboard side.
Too close.
Too close.
Too close.
I saw many ships that were towed back. It was the one DMS towing it backwards. Everything above deck taken off.
Yeah.
We would go out and relieve a ship that was sunk. And the ship we were relieved, not there anymore. When we come back in, relieved by a ship that was sunk. So the Navy was really running out of destroyers.
Yes.
There in the ships to put out there. They put everything out.
Yeah.
At one time, they set us out at the big Japanese battle wagon, Yamato.
Yes.
Yamato. They sent everything that could move out after that ship.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad we didn't catch it.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, it was a monster.
it was a monster. It was sunk before it reached Okinawa plains.
Yeah.
When we had one sub sighting and we dropped depth charges, don't know the results.
No, sure.
At Okinawa, we shot down 2 of our own planes. We became a fighter control ship, which was, they put extra members aboard that controlled 2 Marine airplanes, and we would send them out where our radar had better ability. Wherever we picked up the Japanese, we would vector our planes out, and we were credited with better than 30 planes that way, knocking down 30 Japanese planes.
That was good use.
What happened, they left us late in the afternoon, and they went around IE Shima. And when they came in out of the sun and just floated over the plane in 2 quad 40s. That's a bank of 4 guns. 2 quad 40s shot them down with just what they had in their barrel.
Really?
But you could not wait. I mean, if you waited, gives me another story.
That's right.
What was it? I'll tell you the name as we go through it. This particular destroyer was the unluckiest ship in the Navy. When they put it in commission, Brooklyn Navy Yard, when they left the Navy Yard, they forgot to untie the bow lines. And and as they backed out, they tore off all their railings. That's the way it started out.
That's not a good sign.
Willie D. Porter is the name of it.
Oh, dear.
It was assigned to protect Roosevelt when he was going over the Atlantic.
Yeah.
The ship, I believe it was a cruiser,
Yes.
and Roosevelt was on it.
Yes.
And it was going across to meet with Churchill.
Well, do you remember hearing when Roosevelt died?
Yes.
You got the news on ship?
Yes. But I want to just finish this.
Oh, I'm sorry.
They had some demonstration firing for Roosevelt's appreciation.
Yes.
And the torpedomen, they were firing dummy torpedoes, and the torpedomen fired a live torpedo at the ship that Roosevelt was on. Oh. And the last second, they communicated with the cruiser, and the cruiser was able to avoid the torpedo. I'll give you a write-up on that when we leave, if you remind me.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah. And the porter was on picket duty at Okinawa, and it had the Commodore on board of our squadron. The Commodore is the top command of 8 destroyers. And when we shot down the 2 planes, the Commodore gave our skipper holy hell for doing it. And it says, have your gunners go back and go through aircraft recognition. Well, it wasn't but weeks later. He waited too long, and the Willie D was sunk by a kamikaze.
Oh, really?
They waited too long.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm going to turn this off. Hello, excuse me, this one. Hello.
Hey, Sam, this is Raymond.
Yes, Raymond.
I got an email from Sam Easton, and he wanted your email address, but I forgot what it was.
Zepprop, ZEPPROP, at Gmail. Got to hang up, hide out. Let me turn this off. Come on. Okay.
Well, now, when we're up to about what month now in
Well,
45?
that would have been about June. Must have been sometime in June 1945.
Yeah, yeah.
And from there, side story, Jimmy Hume. I don't know if they appreciate these little.
That is the story. That is the story of the war as you went through it.
Well, we had a friend, Jimmy Hume. Jimmy is one of the few members of the crew that is still alive.
Uh-huh.
He was also in the radio gang.
Uh-huh.
But we both went in as last resort. And Jimmy, if there's ever anyone that could do something wrong, he would do it wrong. I remember watching him swabbing the deck outside the radio shack. And he's swabbing the deck, and he had to step over going through a hatch.
Yeah.
I watched him put the bucket on the other side of the hatch. He's mopping, he's backing. He steps right into the bucket. And Jimmy was the only fella aboard ship that went AWOL on a deserted island.
What a record.
We stopped and they had a beer break during the break of the battle.
Uh-huh.
And when we got back, Jimmy was still there drinking beer. Had to go back and get him. From there, we went to the Philippines. And we went to Leyte and attended a USO band. Yes, yeah. It was right in the middle of the jungle.
Oh, really?
Right in the middle of the jungle. They put down these coconut logs in a semicircle so you could watch the show.
Yeah.
And I never will forget it. It was Sway and Sway with Sammy Kaye's who was there.
I'll be darned.
Yeah. And I sat on that log all night. I left with him. I couldn't get a Purple Heart for it. But I developed an itch on one of my cheeks of my fanny. It stayed with me, must be 20 years. But how do you complain about that?
Service-connected something.
They put us on an island on Leyte, and beautiful white sand beach. And they gave everybody the equivalent of a case of beer, hot beer. That was our entertainment that day.
Yep.
From there, there we were where we heard the war was over.
Yeah.
And all the ships in the harbor fired all their guns. You had more rockets and everything else up in the air than you could count.
That's what I heard.
And from there we went to right straight to Wakayama. and we were there before peace was signed.
Uh-huh.
And I have some pictures. I'm sure I do. I picked up a Wakayama when we went in.
Did you?
You saw that picture of the Japanese pilots going aboard?
Yes.
We didn't know what to expect.
Yeah.
But the Japanese were so passive, showed no sign of emotion
Right.
wherever I went. I mean, it was
Yeah.
just amazing. We went ashore, it was like entering American city. They weren't American cities, this was
Right.
rural area.
Yeah.
And while in Wakayama, they asked who wants to go to Hiroshima. So that's one thing I volunteered for.
Did you?
And they put us on a truck and drove us to Hiroshima. And they didn't tell us, no one told us anything about radiation
No.
or radioactivity
No.
or anything. I walked through that place kicking up dust,
Did you really?
really, in that dome building.
Yeah.
I was all through the building. I mean,
Really?
and didn't stop. I remember passing a fire station and rusted hulks of fire trucks inside, just sitting on the ground.
Yeah.
And the people there didn't show any. I couldn't detect any emotion.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the stoic Japanese as I know them.
It is.
And from there we went to Yokosuka. They call it Yokosuka, which was right outside of Tokyo.
Uh-huh.
And they had a Japanese officers club where they had beer and you could entertain yourself.
Yeah.
Well, I went and hopped on a train to Tokyo. Now, Tokyo was something else. You could look as far as you could look and nothing standing. It was all burnt to the ground. I think the fire bombings took,
Yeah.
I don't know whether it's 250,000 or 1/3 people died in those fire bombings.
Yes.
But again, there is no emotion shown by the Japanese. The buses that ran off charcoal. They had charcoal burners in the back that would create a gas which they were able to drive with. I was up on the Emperor's Palace up on the hill. No one stopped me. I didn't try and go in. I didn't. I don't know why. And there were the young Japanese playing baseball on the field outside. While there, earlier I had bought a camera from the Japanese, swapping cigarettes for. Cigarettes were a common currency.
Right.
And you could get 15 yen for a package of cigarettes. That's like $15. Yeah, those $1 for it. The cigarettes cost you a nickel, and you got $1 back when you traded it.
I see.
I bought a camera and started taking pictures. And I was passing one place, I see some people crowded there, and I take a picture. I have a picture I'll show you of Douglas MacArthur that I took while he was in Tokyo.
Really? Yeah.
He didn't know me and I didn't know him. And I wish I'd known more and more adult while I was there and been able to take advantage of the opportunities there.
Sure.
You could have brought pearls back for nothing. You could have brought, there are so many things, but the Japanese didn't have anything to eat.
Right. It was really demolished.
It was demolished. I mean, completely destroyed. I'm trying to remember back in Okinawa, the few buildings that were remaining.
Well, now, how long were you there?
I think I must have been there maybe 3-4 weeks, 5 weeks.
Were you on duty doing?
Oh, I stayed in Japan until I guess about January or February, and then headed back to the States.
So were you were an occupying force?
We were occupying for us being a crew on a destroyer, there was very little for us to do.
Sure. And your job as an occupier was what? Just
well, be on a ship, I guess, in case the Japanese had plans and put aside planes for resistance.
Yeah.
That never happened.
But
I remember seeing the Japanese prisoners returning from ships and watching them in long lines. They weren't prisoners, they just returning to Japan. And I think they just plain discharged them and let them roam.
Yeah.
But no emotion. I ran into one who could speak English, and again, the same thing. It's like, how are you, John? Oh, today is Tuesday.
Yeah.
I mean, that was it. Their emotions are held inside them.
But also, it must have been like a state of shock that just didn't go away.
I think so, but I think it was another day in the life.
Yeah.
And later on, I met a Japanese man on a plane, Yoshio Tanaka. I was flying, I'm getting ahead of myself, but meeting Yoshio, he was on a flight to New York, and I hate talking to people and hearing their life story on an airplane. But Yoshio seemed to be so confused with schedules and everything. I says, can I help you? He said, well, I need a hotel. It was hard understanding him at the time. In New York, will you make a call for me? Well, I was going to New York for a hotel show. I'll tell you about that later.
Okay.
But I says, yes, I can help you. Well, what happened? There was a hotel show, and I was building Holiday Inns at the time.
Yeah.
And I had made 2 reservations, and I only needed 1.
Oh.
Well, we called all the hotels that Yoshio wanted, and no space. They were all filled.
Uh-huh.
And I said, I'll give you 1. So I called, let him take my hotel. He thought that was a cat's meow.
Yes.
I mean, I had magic powers.
Yes, that was.
And I said, Yoshio, join me at the show. Well, sure enough, here's Yoshio showing up at the show. And he was curious. This was his first time in the United States.
Yeah. Background
on Yoshio. I guess the best way to describe Yoshio, he was an entrepreneur.
Uh-huh.
He took the icy, remember the icy?
Oh, yes.
He took that to Japan.
Oh.
He took the Gatorade to Japan.
Sure.
And later, I mean, this is the type of man.
He's looking for
opportunities.
Sure.
I mean, he sold them off later on. One day he shows up, he opens his briefcase. Sounds like a fairy tale, lined with $100 bills, stacks of $100 bills, lined. And Yoshio thought I was God's gift to.
Yes.
And
yes.
In New York, I went on to Washington. I had a friend in Washington I wanted to visit, George Parrish. He worked for the Labor Department. And I'd stayed with George at his place in Washington. And Yoshio gives me a call. I says, why don't you stop by and George show you around Washington? Well, here, Yoshio shows up in Washington. I'd left, and Yoshio showed him around Washington. And I went back to Jacksonville. All of a sudden, telephone call. I'm coming to Jacksonville to visit you. Well, he flew to Jacksonville to visit me. And he was the best guest you ever had. He cooked Japanese food every day for us. I mean, the best.
Oh, I'll bet.
I mean, he was a very good being around. He's getting ready to leave. He says, Sam, come with me to Japan. So I packed a little 24-inch suitcase I had, and I go to the airport. He gets a ticket. We fly to Honolulu because at that time you needed visas to get into Japan.
Uh-huh.
He went and got me a visa. We stayed several days in Japan, and he took me and put me up the new Tani Hotel, this brand new hotel.
What year was this?
This would have been maybe the late 50s, early 60s. And he took me to Japan. And seeing Japan like no, he had a white Russian mistress from Hong Kong. And he'd send a chauffeur-driven car with linens in the back, and she would show me all of Japan. I mean, everything you could. It was a tour you couldn't forget.
Oh, that's right. What an experience!
I went back, and I could not take a nickel out of my pocket the whole time.
Really?
He flew back on one trip. I don't know why. I guess on the map, Jacksonville's this far from San Francisco.
Right. It's only that.
So he flew to Jacksonville. He says, "I'm going to Italy, so come with me." Then he went to, I think it was outside of Milan, and I went with him, and as part of his negotiations, I don't know whether he used me as a trophy or what.
A travel buddy for sure.
Well,
now what year were you discharged from the Navy?
I was discharged in 1946. I think in June, no, maybe April or June. And when I got out, I'd contacted typhus, and they took me to the VA hospital in Lake City.
Okay,
And
but you came back through Honolulu?
I came back through Honolulu and landed in right outside of Los Angeles. We landed.
And then how did you get back to the East Coast?
What happened, they gave us liberty as soon as we came back. I went to Los Angeles, and I'd call my family and spoke to my dad. It was at noon, they were having lunch. And when I got back to the ship, there was a message my dad had died. He had a heart attack. And I thought they were playing games with me, trying to get me back on emergency leave.
Yeah.
I mean, it was one of those things you just spoke to them, and there it's gone. And I hitchhiked back on Navy planes, made 3 stops across country. And I get to New York, Floyd Bennett Field. There are no planes out. So I caught a subway to downtown New York, to the National Airlines ticket. I think it was National Airlines ticket office. And if you could see me I hadn't had a bath in 3 days. I had stubble for as young as I was. I had a stubble, and I was carrying a Japanese rifle with a bayonet on it on the subway. You know.
No, you wouldn't get
no one asked me any questions. And I got to the ticket office. I said, I got to get home on emergency leave. Well, they put me on a plane that night on the stewardess jump seat. They were packed, and they put me on a jump seat and flew me back. I don't know how I paid for it, whether I got a ticket or what, but I don't remember. But we got back to Jacksonville, and I think it was maybe 6 o'clock in the morning, and my dad's funeral was at 10. So the funeral was going to go on with or without me.
Sure.
So I made it just in time.
When you look back on all of those experiences when you were in the service, do you feel like you were a changed person? Did anything about your service in the Navy make you a different person than you would have?
I'd say, thank goodness for the naval service. I mean, to me, it was rewarding. It made me more worldly. I felt it made me more worldly and more curious.
Yes.
And when I went to school, they were all in my same boat. The veterans, the students were older than the professors.
Yes.
Back then.
Well, you're going to get to that part. Shall we do a little switcheroo? Okay. Do we need to take a break now? Take a break?
I'm still.
He's rolling. He's rolling.
Here we have us.
Okay.
If you want something fresh in your.
Julia. Deborah?
No, I'll just leave this. Sorry, thank you.
No, all right, I will, thank you.
You want it?
No,
Do you want one?
I can go
I'm
again.
good.
I'll drink this one then. You want to open it?
I have my water. Okay, so then, are we good?
We're good.
Anytime you are.
Okay. So,
Who are the people that say, we're ready when you are?
That we did.
Advertisement for WWII. I'll have to see about that.
okay. Okay, so then after you finish your service, you decide to attend the University of Florida.
Yes.
Why did you pick UF?
It was a natural for me. It was close, real close.
Okay, and then you were telling us that you first decided to go into dentistry, but it didn't work out, and then you chose...
It wasn't for me and I wasn't for it. It would have killed me,
Okay. And then you chose building construction.
building construction.
Okay.
The classes were temporary buildings, and it was completely different. I mean, the tables were a couple of sawhorses with a piece of plywood across. I think they were doors across. Those were our desks. Our lockers were surplus Army footlockers, and they're located right back of where the architectural school is now.
Architecture? Okay. All right. So what was UF like in the late 40s?
Well, I believe it was the enrollment, whether the prior class or the class I went in, was close to 9,000 people. So it was a small university. And you recognize faces if you didn't know them. And really, you didn't have the tomfoolery that you have when you get a 17 and 18-year-olds. I mean, people were more serious, although I could have been a good student, except Jacksonville was so close every weekend. I took off Friday afternoon and then returned to Monday morning. I learned a big lesson, though, on this. There was a fellow named Jimmy Wilson, went to the University of Florida. He was one of 2 quadruple amputees of World War II. He went to law school there. I used to catch a ride with him. It's before I had a car, going back to Gainesville. And you were with that fella 15 minutes and you forgot he had a disability. He drove his own car. He graduated law school. He had to move from the state of Florida because of the dampness affected his limbs. I think he went to Arizona, and on my wall I have his obituary. And it was a lesson in life that, nothing is impossible.
Yeah.
And again, talking to him taught me lots about being more upbeat than ever allowing myself to get depressed.
So, do you have any other favorite memories while you were here at UF as a student? What things were
As a student,
Yes.
yes. I met my first wife there, and she was the prettiest thing in the world. I mean, she was a dead ringer for Doris Day. And I might have stayed married with her, except she never grew up. She never left the mother. So other people have that same thing. And I always found a way to do something. I guess in construction, the word can't is an impossible word. It's another word for won't. Mm-hmm. And a step ahead, I was looking for a job in Philadelphia, and I remember Brenneman. They were dock builders. Doesn't sound like much, but the job, I'll tell you about that in a little while. After having typhus, I just scared of doing anything. I didn't have the self-assurance. I walked past that door, I bet 10 times but I wouldn't leave until I walked in. I mean, I was ready to just walk away and say I'll try someplace else. It was the old school type of construction where they had the roll top desk and they had everything was stuffed and everything was just in order. I got the job, and I didn't stay on it very long. It just wasn't for me. I decided to go back to Jacksonville, but they were rebuilding the Ford Motor Company pier just south of Philadelphia. And that pier was so big, an ocean-going ship could fit across the end, 2 down each side. It had 5 rail spurs going out on it, and it was shifting out to the river. Well, they asked me if I could do it. I said yes. And I always found a way to do it. There is a way to learn. learn a few key phrases or something until you pick up and watch somebody. I told you I learned how to type, looking over someone's shoulder.
You're creative. Okay, and so what year did you graduate from UF?
I'm sorry?
What year did you graduate from UF?
1950. I should have graduated in 49. I passed the whole, they gave me some tests. I didn't know what the tests were. Were they called CLEP tests or your knowledge? And I passed the whole first year. But that's the way I was able to float through 4 years. The government was paying for it. They paid for everything. If you needed a typewriter, they paid. You signed a chit and got a typewriter. And they gave me $100 a month. Boy, $100 a month.
Thank you, the GI Bill.
Okay, so after you graduated, what was your first job? And what did you do right after?
Right afterwards, I tried to build a house with another one of my friends from college. And I borrowed the money. I think the house sold for $7,000 at that time, maybe somewhere around that. And we built it, and we didn't make any money because I didn't know what I was doing. Then I went to work for who did I go to work for? Oh, I went to work for Merritt, Chapman and Scott. They were the largest contractors in the world at the time. They were building the paper mill out in off Heckscher Drive in Jacksonville. And I worked as an assistant engineer, and I measured all the dirt that had to be moved. I didn't know how to do that, but I learned in a hurry. And I finished that, and then I had one car, and my spouse did not have a car, and I had a long ride. That didn't work out. So I found a job close in town. It used to be Gibbs Shipyard. And Frank Brownette was a contractor in Jacksonville, and he was in charge of the yard, all the buildings of the shipyard. He took me on as his assistant. And I was doing a pretty good job. And that's the only time I know of that I've ever had anti-Semitism enter into my life. The shipyard was run pretty much on partying the naval personnel to get the contracts. I mean, there was lots of drinking, and one day the assistant to the vice president approached me and asked if I was the Sam Price that was in the Jacksonville Jewish Center yearbook. I said yes. He came back the second day and he says it'd be best for all concerned if you resign.
Oh my God.
So that was the only experience. Well, as it happened, I resigned. I went to Philadelphia for a year. My father-in-law told me Philadelphia streets were paved with gold. I believed them. They were dirty streets. But as it went on, Gibbs Shipyard went into decline. I mean, the structure just ruptured itself. And I had the satisfaction of going up to that vice president. He turned into an alcoholic, and I ran into him years later in the post office. And I walked up and I said, "I'm Sam Price. I don't know if you remember me." I related the incident. I says, "Look at you now and look at me," and walked away. That was all the satisfaction I need. The other fellow, Steve Richardson, I had my hand on his job, and he knew it all through his working career. I knew somehow I've had an ability of meeting good people or good friends, and having a good friend, it's a reciprocal. I mean, it's a give and take, and there's no measurement of the give and take. So that was my Jacksonville experience. I moved to Philadelphia, went to work for the building a pier. It snowed up there. It was dirty up there. It was cold up there. I went and bought a Chevrolet, and I went back to Jacksonville. And I started off with my brother. Oh, during that period, my father had a house across from Gibbs Shipyard. And he gave it. He died. My mother gave it to us as an office. My brother and myself. And Gibbs their people would park in front, take all the parking expense, and the policeman would come by and mark it, and they'd walk out and roll their car back so the mark was on the bottom of the wheel. But then I figured that out. I says, "You know what? I'll buy a marker." I marked the top of the wheel. So we started having spaces again.
So, your brother and you started a construction company?
Started a construction company, and it was very small. We started out building some houses. And I remember the first 3 houses we built were on O'Hara Road. And I think they were $8,000 or $9,000 at the time. That's the cost of the house. And I remember we had just finished the 3rd house. And Jack and I sitting on the stoop, and it started raining. It was on a Saturday. He says, "Sam, what do we do now?" And while we were sitting there, someone drove up front, walked in, and bought a house. You know, how things happen, why they happen, you'll never know. But if you have faith, somehow that's half the battle. It might not solve it. And another thing I learned in life is, if you have a problem, if you dwell on the problem, you're lost. If you start thinking it won't be here tomorrow. And sure enough, I've never seen the following day where it wasn't been better.
Sure.
Whether it's a little bit better, but it's better.
That's right.
You can worry yourself to death.
That's right.
And I get ribbed many times because they say I don't worry. I think about it, but I don't dwell on it. And it's just one of those little training exercises.
Good one. That's a good one.
And somehow some of these cliches fit. And if you think up one of those cliches, it'll certainly go a long way. At least you'll smile while you think about it. Go ahead.
So after you say you built like 3 or 4 houses, what did you build after that?
We started building larger houses, and then I've found every so many years there's a dip. And if you let that dip worry you, you're lost. And when the dip came in housing, we started building warehouses. And when that houses returned, we built houses through a couple of cycles, and then we went into commercial and industrial. And once we went into commercial and industrial, we would build for other people. I mean, if I told you the number of clients we've had in our lifetime, I mean, big clients. But we never tried to be the biggest builder. Mm-hmm. And we tried to say, out of the news and out of the front page, I mean, people get to know you, they're going to come back to you.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
The first decent-sized job I'll never forget, we had a house on Myrtle Avenue, and then we built a building there. Then we put an addition on the building. A fellow shows up at our office, Paul Mansfield. This was in the early 50s. He says, he walked in, he had a gimpy hand, a gimpy foot, dragging his foot. Evidently he had a stroke. He came in wearing bib overalls. And he says, I've got a little job, can you take care of it? We spent time with it. We ended up doing maybe $200,000 worth of work. Back then, $200,000 is maybe $20 million worth of work today. I don't know, it's a big difference.
Big job.
The size. And after knowing Paul a while, evidently he sold some land up in Atlanta, farmland. He told me he had been to 5 contractors' offices and no one would talk to him. Lesson learned? Yeah. Talk to everybody. I mean, no matter who they are.
Yeah.
Lesson learned. I've built all over the country. When I go on a job out of the state, the first person I walk up to is a laborer and start there and work up to the superintendent. That laborer can tell you a lot.
Oh, yes.
And if he's teed off at you, he can mess up a footing, he can leave a rod out if he doesn't recognize you. So it's worked for me. I don't know if it'll work for anybody else.
It's a good philosophy.
So
you've really seen Jacksonville develop then.
Yeah, we would develop a 200-acre industrial park. Things, I don't know why. I picked the location. How my contribution to the library came about. I had a partner in the venture, Sam Gibbs, and we found a piece of property in Gainesville. And we bought it. I mean, it was easy. And Sam Gibbs wanted to retire, so I bought him out. He was from Live Oak, Florida. He was literally the mayor. He was, I told you earlier, Jews moving south.
Yeah.
His family went to Live Oak. And if you talk to Sam and Walla, you find out the other little cities that his family members went.
Yes.
And that's the way the migration went. I don't know, maybe some of it went down the East Coast, but this went through the center of Georgia, followed the railroad. I had the land, and we were building, didn't have time for it. And I read an article about gifting, I think in the Wall Street Journal. Well, I learned earlier, yes. I bought a mini warehouse in Jacksonville and had space for other units, and I kept adding on. And I always listened to a story. And I had a manager, the manager says, I know somebody who has a dredge. What do I know about dredging? He says, well, I don't know how to operate it. He says, I know someone that'll operate it. So I paid $4,000 for a dredge. And all of a sudden it's leaning up against the warehouse. Then I formed a company, Charlie Company, after Charles. And we started fixing up the dredge. I mean, it was like an avocation, not a vocation.
It just grew.
It just grew. And I put it out, and the fellow who did it, well, anyway, it cost me money every time it went out. And what am I going to do? And he came in and he says, I've got a Boy Scout troop that wants that dredge. So I says, okay, I'll give it to him. And we made a deal. And I said, just get me an appraisal. At the time, he got me an appraisal of $250,000. On it. It was a good dredge.
Good dredge.
They were glad to get it.
Sure.
I made a hell of lots of money doing nothing, losing money.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
So it's being able to take it that next step and not giving up. And I guess that led to reading the Wall Street Journal an article about giving. And I had this property back up. I was invited to go to Israel after the 6-Day War. The government took me, my brother and I. And they took us up on the Golan Heights. This is only weeks after the battle. And we look out, you couldn't count the number of knocked out tanks. Could not count. They were everywhere. And I walked out, I climbed on top of a tank, I looked down at it, a burnout driver still sitting in the driver's seat. I mean, that's how fresh it was.
Sure.
They took us down to the Sinai, and I go on a gun emplacement. And there's ammunition just lying around, the tank guns sitting there. They just took off running their helmets. I brought back I've got a helmet up in the...
You pointed to it, yes. Yes.
That's the helmet. I brought back a gas mask. And at that time, I could have brought back hand grenades or anything else.
Anything else
I mean,
you
there
wanted.
weren't restrictions on airplanes. So they get us in a corner, just like Kathy. And, and they start talking to us about making a gift. Well, we had the property sold. And I think it's around $400,000. And we'd give them $100,000. I mean, if you haven't touched it yet, you haven't lost it.
Yeah.
It was an easy transfer for us. We get back to Jacksonville and the market. The sale fell through. We owe $100,000. And how are we going to pay for it?
Yeah.
Well, we paid it off. I mean, you just work a little harder.
Yeah.
And we got the property. And I read an article, and it was approaching, must have been about October, November, at the end of a physical year. I said, I'll give it to the University of Florida. And we got it appraised, and that was the start of
That's wonderful.
our relationship.
That's wonderful.
And, you know, when you can give and it doesn't hurt,
Yeah, exactly.
it's much easier. So you have to go out and make another dollar. So,
That's right.
so again, it's part of, I hate to be self-serving and say, part of my life and part of my philosophy in life. I don't know what I have today. I really, Harry might be able to tell me, but I know just create another problem, not another problem, another solution or another opportunities. And my whole life has just been finding opportunities.
Sure sounds like it.
I built in every state between Florida. Well, I built the upper state, New York. I built 1, 2, 3, 4. I built four motels in New York State. I built 2 in Pennsylvania. I built 2 in Maryland. I built 1 in Dover, Delaware. And each one of these, I went in as a stranger. And someone from Florida, they said, boy, I got a country boy here. I'm going to take him. And it's finding a way to do it. When we built in Scranton, I couldn't get the right steel prices, so I had someone fabricate it into Jacksonville and ship it up. I shipped up a store for the fronts of motels from Jacksonville, fabricated. If I couldn't get I had the electrician from Philadelphia do the electrical. When they could, in Utica, New York, I had dealings with the Appalachian Gang. I don't know if you remember the Appalachian Gang, the worst mafia gang there was. When I went into Utica, driving down the street, there's a building in Bulge, 4-story building, getting ready to occupy by Allstate Insurance. Someone had, before it was to be occupied, someone put a candle in front of the boiler and turned on the gas. It blew up. And why did I choose? There was a young sight band I was talked to about doing the sight work. At the time, I was just impressed with them.
Yeah.
Now, one thing in Utica, or through the Northeast, the Italians operated most of the construction up there. And every spring they came out with all new equipment, and the fall they bankrupted, gave it all back. I don't know how they do it year after year after year. But this fellow I gave the job, and I did not know at the time. I do believe, from what I gathered, he was the son of a deceased mafia captain. He was just as straight with me as could be.
Really?
I never paid a dollar of tribute. He took me into Little City Hall, where you see the gangsters around the table playing cards. They said, "Sam, join us in a game of cards." What did I say? I says, "I don't have my glasses with me." I didn't know whether I was supposed to try and win or lose. So,
Right. Right.
and another time, I had an engineer from Jacksonville who was greedy, and I had a partner, and he went to my partner and says, "I can do the work for less." I told my buddy about it. The mafia met him at the airport, getting off the plane, and gave us, "Get back on the plane, or you won't be able to." And he got back on the plane. He never gave me any trouble after that. So, without a penny of tribute. But experiences. I was building one in Middletown, New York, a Holiday Inn. And I was staying in a motel in Nyack, New York. It's close to the site. And we're approaching the winter, and we had to turn on the gas. We weren't completed. Well, I get a call from the union. You're going to have 4 people babysitting the boiler, a pipe fitter, a electrician, but there's 4 people, 24 hours a day for the rest of the job, just to sit there.
Yeah.
Well, what do you do? They call me in Jacksonville. I make an appointment. I says, "Meet me at my motel." Night before I was leave, "What are you going to do, Sam?" I called my uncle. I had an uncle who worked for the labor department in Washington. I think he counts bales of cotton from Egypt or something like that. I says, "Ben, I might call you. Don't pay any attention to what I say."
Yeah.
And the first one came in. He gave me his demands. It'd be one man, 24 hours a day through the life of the job. It would have broke me.
Yeah.
So while I split up the crew, so I didn't meet them all at once.
Oh.
I mean, so they didn't. Before I gave a cock and bull story of what to do, and I says, "That doesn't sound right." I says, "I've got an uncle on the arbitration board in Washington. Let me give him a call." I dialed him and they asked for me. He says, "Hang up." And then we negotiated.
Yeah.
It cost so little. But I went through that 4 times in one day. And you talk about draining. I had, when I finished, here comes I've got the storefronts going in. Well, if they're fabricated, it takes 2 men to put them in and tie them down.
Yeah.
He says you're going to have a carpenter, a glazer, and a metal worker every time you put a frame in until you put a frame in. And I went through the same thing again. I didn't think I could do it, but it worked. And this was with the labor unions out of New York City. So sometimes you have to think on your feet. Oh, another fancy story, though. In Utica, it was primarily Italian and Irish that lived in Utica at the time. And there was a hill in Utica, top of the hill the Irish lived. There's a red light on top of that hill. The red light is on the top. The green light is on the bottom. The Irish would not have any other color. It's the only place I've ever run into like that. And every time they'd try it, they'd shoot it out. So, the things that you remember come back to you.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. I'm holding you up.
These are great. You had mentioned you named one of your companies after your son. So how many children do you have?
I had 4 sons. Tail end Charlie was a daughter. Number 3 son went to the University of Florida. Number 3 and number 4 son went to University of Florida. Number 1 son went to American University, where he was assistant, what do they call administrative assistant, one of the congressmen. And then he went to University of Miami for his law degree. He's practicing in Miami. Number 2 is Charles. Charles started at the Gainesville, and each semester I'd say, give me the books you're buying, I give you money. And I think he was in Gainesville 2 years, but I didn't know he was running a string of sandwich shops. I still don't know if he attended class there or not, or ever registered. But I sent a check. But he is, without a doubt, one of the smartest, most clever businessmen. I mean, he's astute.
He took after you.
Yeah.
Well, I think he's ahead of me.
He found opportunities.
And number 3 went the first year at the University of Florida, and he wasn't a student. He was a scholar, but not a student. He dropped out and hit the road. And all of them I tried to send to Europe, but I'd only give them enough money for a ticket and very little, they had to make their own way. Yeah, I sent Todd to Europe, and when I finally found him, he was in Greece, in Thessalonica. I think he's making cheese or something. And I bring him back, and he came back with bib overalls, long hair, long beard, and I think he rode the rails in. And came to Jacksonville, and we didn't get along. He was thinking one way, and I was thinking the other. He went out to California and became a recruiter for Chavez, the farm group. For years he was doing that. Yeah. Never looked to make money. Then he went to work for the Inland Waterway Union in California. Best thing he ever did. But it was months before he had any work. He went to the Union Hall and took the job that nobody else took. If there's he might not have one job a month, but he had to show up every morning. Yeah. And he ended up at the top of the heap. And he retired, I think, at about 58. But he stayed on and worked. And all this time, his schedule was, he would get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, get to work at 6, and work all day and go to school from then until 9 o'clock at night. He finally got a degree. But you tell me anybody else who worked that hard to get a degree. I mean, and he ended up with I guess 1,000 books. I mean, he read perpetually. Yeah. And he had a life mate, soul mate, They were together about, I guess, 8, 10, 12 years. And they never married, but she was a better wife than 90% of the wives. I mean, they lived for each other. And his philosophy was, if I get married, I'll ruin the marriage. So they stayed together, and they belonged to a sailing club. The sailing club was maybe 500 members, a big sailing club out there. And he was I guess, the major domo. And he took out a sailboat, a new sailboat, to try it out, a new style. And no one heard from him, and the boat washed up on the rocks. And he was still he had a heart attack and died at the age of 60 at the tiller. So he died doing, if there's any consolation, doing just what he loved. He worked on the ferry boats that went from San Francisco to Sausalito. He was on the ferry boat during the big earthquake in San Francisco. Yeah. He says they didn't know anything was happening because they were on water.
Sure.
So
I wanted to get back to when you and your brother made the endowment for the Judaica collection at the University of Florida, and you named it after your parents.
Well, it was done in real short order. And, what do you do for your parents? And it sounds trite, but this is something that kids who want an education can get it. It's good. I'm a firm believer, if you give your kids too much, you ruin them. And each one of my kids, if they went to college, I gave the tuition, the schooling, but the rest of it they had to earn. And I have a next door neighbor, Chuck Smith, with a name like that is common. But I mean, he's a great neighbor. His father, he grew up in Cairo and Dubai. His father was in the oil business, owned oil, and when Chuck got out of high school, his father says, he gave $100,000. He says, that's all you're getting from me, and he's held to it. And Chuck's built his own, so he could have spent it on a car or whatever, but he taught him how to manage. And his son, Kathy, you should meet his son is a perfect candidate for the University of Florida. He's 13 years old now. I've never met a boy like this. He's scholarly, he's plays sports. I just can't rave about him enough. If he sees me doing something, he comes over and says, let me help you. You don't find people like that.
That's right.
He goes to bowls, he does well, and he's inquisitive. Well, how did I get on that subject? But
that was a good story. So that was what your brother and yourself wanted to do in your parents' memory.
Well, Jack and I went in business, and until we got the mini storage, and Jack wanted out, and I think was mainly, I should say, no, I don't want to say it. No, it was kids, what you want for your kid and his ability. So let's leave it at that.
And then your family also in 2011, you donated the Torah from the Beth Shalom Synagogue?
Yes.
And then why did you want the Torah to be housed at the school?
Well, we belonged. I actually paid to 3 synagogues. I was paying 3 synagogues and 1 Greek church. One of my best friends was a fellow named Jerry Philos, and we met in the 7th grade. And I tell you, you're blessed if you have a real good friend, and I have several of them. But Jerry hits me up all the time for his church, and I can't refuse them.
And then you have. Oh yeah, keep going.
I don't know if I answered your question.
Well, no. Oh well, it was like, why did you want the Torah to go to University of Florida?
Oh well,
In the synagogue.
my mother had purchased the Torah, and again, it goes back to my dad. He felt strongly about education, and whether it rubbed off, there are so many charities, and the money dissipates and goes. I mean, where do you see results? In education, you see results. And I really, honestly believe this is something that can be used by many students. And that's not a trite statement, it's a heartfelt statement. And if you can do that. Well, my mother bought the Torah, and it went to Etzheim Synagogue. And like many synagogues, for one reason or another, they either split or whatever, and went out of business. Synagogue was there. Jack and I talked the other two into giving it. It's a fitting place. They don't have a synagogue, have a Torah. They had the books. It just fit in, and it was an opportunity.
That was a really great donation. It's incredible. And you had said that, so Sam Proctor grew up, you said, about 4 blocks away from you?
That's right. And there was a group of, Jacksonville wasn't like New York or any other place. But if you'd go together, there was a Silvers living on one side, the Proctors. People would congregate on their front porch. And in the evening, what did you do? You finish work or finish what you're doing, you'd go sit on a porch and either drink a beer, drink whatever you're drinking, milk, or you'd talk. And that's a lost art. Digress again. And one of my pet peeves is going into a restaurant and seeing 2 people, each at their phones texting rather than talking to each other. And it's more the rule rather than the exception today.
Yes, it is. So you and your family in the past 30 years, you've given a lot, back to the community, especially to University of Florida. So we wanted to ask, what does philanthropy mean to you?
Say that.
Like, what does philanthropy mean to you?
I've always had confidence in myself. I mean, really, it's, I've never worried about failure. And another thing, I believe, there's nothing wrong with failing. Just learn from it. I saw one, you ever see Tom Trout's sign as you get off of 95? And the last one, the best lesson is your last mistake. And it's true. Now you can learn from it, or you can make the same mistake again. That's your option.
That's right. That's right.
So we're getting down to our last couple of questions here. So you've lived in Florida most of your life, right?
All my life.
All your life. Okay. So what's the biggest change that you've seen in the state of Florida?
That's a difficult set. There are so many changes. I mean, you've got Disney, you've got aircraft transportation, the airplanes. You got big cities which you can't get through. But I guess one of the most difficult thing is the lack of communication between people. People talking to people. And it's an epidemic. And somehow we have to turn that around. I'm not capable of turning it around, so I'm not a crusader. But our political system stinks. Not the system, it's the people behind the politics stink. And they all seem so many of them are self-serving. And the banks being charged billions of dollars for dishonesty and greed. So there has to be more motivation other than greed.
Well, and then also, Katie had mentioned that you have traveled a lot. You used to take a trip once a month to go to
just about 8-10 times a year. I mean, I bet I've seen close to 140 countries, 130, 120, but I started traveling in the early 50s. And I think I took a trip to Costa Rica, and I had Laxa Airlines. I knew someone who went to Costa Rica to make cloth bags. He was selling bags, handbags, or carry bags to the Navy. He would make them there for less. This was in the early 1950s. And I get on the airplane, Laxa Airline. I sit down, there's a net across the middle of the cabin. There are cows on the other side of the net. And the steward came by and asked me, did I want a drink? I said, I want a scotch. He brought a fifth of scotch instead of... I've never seen anything like that. And while there was no tourism there. They had a museum dedicated to the pre-Columbians and the gold. And actually, you could have broken into the museum with a can opener. It was a corrugated building. And I went down and I started collecting pre-Columbian items. And, well, I could show them to you later on, but they're so interesting. And I found people who could reproduce it. And I had an emblem for the Holiday Inn. And I only had a day overnight left. And I think I had a lady friend or someone. And I asked where to do it, and he takes me to the second floor. Here's a man casting it, making it, putting it in the rubber mold, and he brings it back. It's too late. I'm getting on the plane. I notice the sign is made backwards. Holiday Inn is spelled. I wish I knew where that was.
You love it.
So, I tell you something else about Costa Rica then. The policemen were armed with screwdrivers. That's right. Instead of writing tickets, they went and took your license tag on your car if it was illegal and took it to the station. You had to go get it.
That'd do it. Good. Very creative.
So,
I think if we did that in Miami, no one would drive.
so I used to go to the same place every morning for coffee. They made coffee with coffee con leche. I mean, it was better than the best milkshake. And you'd sit there and watch the world go by. It was so different then. And there was the head of the language department at the University of North Florida was a fellow named Lawrence Carpenter. Lawrence Carpenter was one of the, he was a very good friend, and he was go down to South America to study the origin of languages. and I used to go with him.
Oh.
And it was an experience. I went places no one else ever had a chance to go.
Sure.
And we went down on this. We went to one trip to La Paz, Bolivia. And I get off that plane, it's freezing. It's at 15,000 feet. And they had oxygen tanks out when you got off. And we go into La Paz, and we check into a hotel. And it was run down, the windows were busted, but this is where all the backpackers stayed.
Sure.
And no heat in it. And they put me in a room, and they didn't have any electric heaters. So I asked for some blankets. They put a pile of blankets on the bed. And when I got on the bed, you couldn't lie on your side or your back. It would bend your toes. It was so much weight.
So
but you stayed warm. The windows had a broken out pane in it. And here it's freezing. And you took a shower. I don't know if you're interested in this, but there was a toggle bolt by the door. You pulled a toggle bolt, it heated an electric element in the shower head. And if you went and turned on the shower too fast, you got ice cold water. And if you too slow, you'd never get the soap off. I mean, he took me to meet Indians, and they considered him really a stepfather. He was such a regular there. I mean, he knew all the Indians, and I had a chance to meet him. I went to, what was it? I don't know. So many different experiences in the pre-Columbian and the Mayan world. I went to Ecuador, and I met a fellow selling pre-Columbian items. And I only had so much money. I says, look, why don't you put a whole lot of that together and bring it to the United States? Didn't think any more about it. I've still got his address. He knocks on my front door.
Here I am.
Here I am. I'll show you a picture again, one of the items I got from him. And then he says, I don't have any more money, but I'm going to New York. So I ended up, back then it wasn't really a big deal. I gave him a ticket to New York, and he shows up again. But the opportunities were, side note, in Jacksonville, there was a fellow named Jaime Trujillo. He was going to JU. And I wish you'd stop triggering my mind. I knew the Swedish vice consul in Jacksonville, Saga Limlu. She was in Italy during the war. She was from Sweden. Her husband was in the lumber business, got stuck in Sweden. She came to Jacksonville. She was quite a woman. And she calls me one day, I need some help. Jaime had shown up over there. There was no Bolivian. There's try to think the country. Well, Jaime was in trouble. He went to a party. He was a student. And one of the people at the party left the car in the neighbor's drive. The neighbors called the police, and they were having a pot party, and Jaime went out the window, and there was a John Doe for him. So she says, can you help Jaime? I'll help Jaime. So it was a phone call, and Jaime was out of trouble. Well, I was his benefactor. And he says, come visit me in Bolivia. Cartagena. Cartagena's Bolivia, isn't it?
Cartagena, it's not Colombia?
Colombia. That's what I was trying. It was Colombia. He was in Colombia. So I show up on his door, made arrangements. And I had no idea Jaime family were cousins of the president. And I've had this happen over and over again. And his mother was a world famous potter on the way to Washington for a show her works. My brother was on the way to Mexico City to show his work. He was an artist. I mean, that's the type of family they took me in, and what they showed me of Ecuador. And I'll show you some things that Jaime gave me of pre-Columbian items. And the same thing. And in Turkey, Yoshio's son, Yoshiaki, he sent him to live with me for 6 months in Jacksonville while he learned English, went to school learning English. And he started bringing home a Turkish girl, Ezra Taser. And Ezra kept insisting to come visit her family. Well, I take Faye and we go over to visit her family. I had no idea her father owned a steel mill there. The grandmother lived on the Bosphorus. And when we saw Turkey, no one else would have had a chance to see. It's just by talking to people and making friends.
It's not in the tour book.
But Ezra moved to California, and she now lives in Dallas. She has 2 kids, divorced. I think she married another Turkish man who didn't want to do anything. And I heard from her on my birthday.
That's sweet.
I mean, these things happen over and over again. So I have a feeling, and I'm talking about I too many times, that I never like to say goodbye. I'll say, I'll see you later. Goodbye seemed to be permanent.
Too final.
Too final. On a Jewish tombstone, there's 2 letters. Fawn is the way it's pronounced, I think. But it means gone. But gone is not going down the road.
Right.
It's a gone forever. So I feel the same way. It's some things are forever and aren't meant to be forever.
Sure.
So it's just a little self-centered feeling. But so many countries like that, I know people. Merida, Mexico. Oh, Merida, Mexico. Went down to Merida. Merida, very few tourists. A beautiful city. A center of the city is a square that you wouldn't believe. But at 5 o'clock, the whole police department marches there with a marching band every day, and you better stand up. You better stand up. I went with Henry Turner one time. Henry Turner is a very dear friend of mine. And if there's no one can have a better partner than Henry. We went there, and I hired a car and a driver. I want to go to Chichen Itza. I'd been there once before, and we went to Chichen Itza. Then we're heading back, and I see some hammocks on the side of the road. So I says, let's stop and see the hammocks. It's a Mexican prison. The prisoners make the hammocks. So I says, Henry, we're going to get inside. So I start talking to the fella. I buy a couple of hammocks. And I says, how am I going inside? No, can't do it. No, can't do it. We talked about a half hour. Finally, he takes me into the superintendent. He takes me into a Mexican prison. And that is something else you've read about. Yeah. And down there, the concrete cubicles. And in that hot sun, I don't know how you live one day. But they let me talk to the prisoners. I mean, I couldn't converse very well, but...
My word.
What brought up Merida? But Merida is what... We stayed at a place in town. It was a great place. I couldn't tell what it was until I got there. is antiquated. The floor sloped 3 inches from one side to the other of the room. But the food was good. And I found a toy store. And they had clay. I'll show you pictures of those too. Figures about so big. I bought them for 50 cents a piece. I bought all they had. I think they had 27 of them. I don't know. I've been giving them away, but I won't give any more away. It's something that they're treasures, and it's just looking and asking questions.
Yeah, yeah.
I bought Faye she had what kind of watch? I'll tell you the story later, but anyway, they don't discount those watches. They don't discount it. And I said I would try and find her one at the right price. Well, we're in Paris. There's a place, an antique dealer we usually stop at, and Faye would get earrings and necklace, and she wanted not a Rolex, it's a Cartier watch. And I had gotten one years ago, and she wanted the one with diamonds. I said, if I can get one, I'll get one. And while there, we walked into a jewelry store right in the right at the other end of the Champs-Élysées. There's an area, and I asked the fellow about would he discount. He chased me out for just saying that. Well, later that day we went by the antique dealer. I says, "Can you help me?" Well, we had asked her on several different occasions. She said, "No." She says, "Maybe I can." She made a telephone call, and someone shows up in a car, and I would have never gotten in a car like that. But I got in, and we go, and they take us to a shady area of France, of Paris, and walk up a flight of stairs. I tell him what I want. He says, "I can handle that." I get in the cab again. He takes me to the very same jewelry store we'd been originally, high-end jewelry store. He gave me, I think, close to 30% off then. And when I finished, Cartier, you cannot find anyone who will ever discount one. And he gave me 30% off. And as I'm leaving, I said, "What about the tax rebate?" I got another 12 or 13% off. And I didn't want to buy it, but I talked myself in. I got in too deep to get
Oh my word. That's
another trip. I know I'm holding it now, but I took a trip with Henry across the northern part of France. And again, many of my trips are from seeing an article, might be 2 words in the article that caught my eye.
grab your attention.
And my attention. You got to find out. And we went across the battlefields of World War I. From Ypres or Wipers, however they pronounce it, all the way across to Verdun. We spent about 10 days doing that. And it was about the best trip I've ever taken in my life. You find groups of English students. The schools send their students there to visit the grave sites.
Yeah.
Around Ypres, they tell me there are close to 1,000 cemeteries from World War I around the city. We went to so many different sites, and you didn't know where you were going next, because at one cemetery I see someone going from gravestone to gravestone. They were from their village in England, has never recorded the deaths of the people from their student, and they're going gravestone to gravestone searching. Yeah. I ran into archaeologists and historians there. You start them talking, they tell you where to go next.
Yeah.
And we didn't know where one night we got to Lille, and I found if you get to a French city, about 4:30, you walk into a tourist center. They speak English, and they'll find you good accommodations.
That's right.
We got to Lilly. It was 6:30. Too late to get, and they had Congress in session. And by the time we went searching, it was pitch black. So we stopped at one more motel. He says, the only thing I can tell you, go down this road, there's a motel, you have to stick your credit card into the slot, and then they let you in. It was a French whorehouse. We couldn't stay there. So we went to the train station, we parked, and we slept in the car overnight. I'm like, those are the things you remember. And the next day we got washed up and took off again. So much for my travels. And I'm sure.
Sounds like a wonderful, wonderful way to go through life.
It is.
Incredible.
And one last word, and I found out they can take everything away from you. They can take your family, they can take your kids, your wealth, your money. If you don't have it, they take your shoes. But they can't take away your memories.
No.
Believe me, that's true.
Yeah. What a treasure.
That's incredible. I mean, honestly, after that, I don't think I have any other questions.
Thank you.
Is there anything else that you would like to add that perhaps we didn't cover?
Oh, there's so much more, but let's, I'll
We
bore
don't
you.
have 4 more weeks.
We don't. We'll need, I think, how many more tapes to fill everything up?
We're good.
Okay.
Well, thank you very
so
much.
So thank you for the opportunity of remembering.